Depew. I'm with Inspired Classroom, and you are looking at some mule deer at Bannack Ghost Town. And I think that the deer are way more fascinating than I am, so I'm going to keep it on that view while I tell you a little bit about the ghost town. So, Bannack was Montana's first state territorial capital, and it was a gold town. There was a big gold rush that happened here, and in the 1800s, in the 1860s, there were quite a few people through about 1920 that lived in the town, and about 1920 was when the last of the residents were moving away. And so now if you come and visit, very, very cool. There's also some ghosts that live here in Bannack Ghost Town, so maybe if you come visit, you'll get to meet some of the ghosts. But we're here to do a little conversation and discussion about sage-grouse. So I'm going to zoom out. You can see the sagebrush in the back. Oh, here I am. I told you I wasn't as interesting as the deer. And I would love to introduce to you Ryan and Vanna and Laurel from Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Park. Ryan is the education specialist. Come on over.
Yeah, I guess first of all, if you watched the first video, I did the first live event, and many of the videos that you got to see with the biologists actually out there working were these two right here, which is the exciting part. So I usually work with people every day. I don't work with grouse every day. So that's the really cool part about this event is you actually get to talk to the professionals, the biologists that work with the grouse every day. So I'll let you guys take over.
Yeah, so as Ryan mentioned, I'm Laurel, and I'm a biologist with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and I do sage-grouse research. So in central Montana, I go out. We have a crew that tags birds and monitors survival and habitat use year-round. And this time of year is the time we're going out and capturing birds, and then over the summer we'll be out all summer tracking birds, finding nests and finding chicks. So yeah, and our goal is to provide information so that managers can better manage and conserve sage-grouse.
And my name is Vanna Bacadorian. I'm a wildlife biologist for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I'm an area biologist, so I'm based in Butte. And so I don't focus on just one species. I actually do a whole bunch of different species. And but I do have a sage-grouse project going on in the Big Hole Valley, and so that's what we'll kind of talk a lot about today. So.
Wonderful. Well, you've brought a lot of really cool things with you today. Would you share some of these tools that you use out in the field?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess...
yeah, why don't we show them? Okay, so this time of year, so Vanna actually was just out last night capturing sage-grouse. So she's brought some of her tools with her, and we've got a grouse we can show you.
And I should tell you that capturing sage-grouse has very strange hours. So we started at 10 o'clock last night. We rode our ATVs for about 3 miles through some pretty rugged country, which took us about an hour and a half before we could even get to work. And then we got back to our trucks at 3 in the morning. I got to bed at 4:30. So it's
so
yeah.
She's really fresh right now.
Yeah, I'm bright as a daisy. But those are the hours when you're capturing sage-grouse. So yeah, so these are kind of the tools of the trade when you're doing captures, and an ATV, which is in the back of my truck, and I haven't unloaded. But yeah, so we're doing it at night. It's dark. Ideally, you do it when there's very little moon out, because you want that darkness. So that I have this is a strobe light. It's not a gun. It's a strobe light, and it has a pretty powerful beam on it. And so we're riding around on the ATVs near the leks, the sage-grouse leks, and we are stopping, every 20 yards or so, and turn off the ATV, stand on the seat so you could get the height advantage, and then we're turning this flashlight on, and we're looking through our binocs, looking for the eye shine from the birds. So they roost on the ground at night, and so we're looking for the shine back from their eyes when we kind of wake them up with the powerful light. And their eyes look like little lavender or violet colored, little purple lights. It's pretty neat to see. So they're just kind of roosting down on the ground. All of a sudden this bright light goes in their eyes. They open up and we could see. And then, so then once that happens, then we go after them with our ATVs and the net. So we'll kind of simulate how that happens, but I don't know if you can
Watch out.
Yeah. So one person's on the ATV, somebody else is running behind with the net, and the person on the ATV is shining that light right at that bird and kind of jiggling it. So you're just confusing them. So they don't quite know what's going on, and then the engine, they have this big noise, this bright light, they're not sure what's happening, so they just kind of hold still. And then right as the ATV gets up to them, the ATV veers off and the person behind just boop, just puts that net right over top of the bird. And this is a rubber net, so it's very, it's not going to cut them or hurt them, and so that's how we get a hold of them. I don't know, Laurel, if you want to add anything different or more to that.
Yeah, no, that was great. Yep. That's pretty much how it works. It's really high tech.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want us to go through what we do once we capture them now.
Yeah, I think that would be
Collars
great.
here, I guess, or what you have.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's two different types of collars. One we have, it's kind of an old school collar. It's a VHF, very high frequency collar. These are pretty small and light, and they sit like a necklace on the bird. So when we capture the bird and put these on, we custom fit it to the bird in the field, so it's not too tight, but it's not so loose that they'll drop it. So it's just like this little tubing that goes around, so it doesn't hurt their neck, and it just kind of hangs like a necklace. And then this antenna kind of runs down parallel to their back, and it's really hard to see. So nothing, it's not going to stand out for predators or anything. And then once they get it on, they kind of move around and ruffle their feathers and stuff, and a lot of times it'll disappear under their feathers, so you can't see it very well. And so these are the kind that you actually have to take an antenna out. So we have this, sure, yeah. We have these receivers. So each tag has a frequency that we can type into a receiver, and then it'll allow us to hear the beeps coming out from the tags. So that lets us know where the bird is, and the antenna, so we can hear them. But it's you have to drive out and find the birds. It takes a long time, so we only locate birds probably twice a week when they have this type of tag on. But Vanna's going to show you we have a GPS tag.
Yeah, so the tag that I use for the study in the big hole, it's actually a little backpack. This is actually a GPS unit, so if you've used any GPS, you're very familiar with this. But this little unit right here, it has a GPS inside of it. It has this antenna that helps to pick up the satellite signal, and then this is actually a solar panel on the back that runs the battery to run the GPS unit. And so when we capture birds, the first thing, well, I'll just kind of work you through the whole thing, but the first thing I'll do when we get the bird out from underneath the net is we put the bird in this bag and we pull a drawstring on it, and I'll weigh it. And so that's how we figure out how heavy the birds are. I'll put it on the scale and I'll weigh it. And then we take the bird out of the bag, and I like to put a little hoodie on them. It just makes them calm. It's not tight at all, but we've got headlamps on, and I don't want to shine that light in their eyes. So we just put that hoodie over them, and that calms them down while we work on them. So one person is holding on to the bird, and a couple of things that we've learned from experience. You got to make sure you get a good handle on their wings. You don't want those wings flapping around. These are really strong birds. And you don't want their feet to touch the ground because they have strong legs, and if they touch the ground, they'll launch themselves off, and you could lose them that way. They'll fly off. So anyway, one person's holding on to the bird, and then the other person puts this backpack on. And so it has these two straps here. These straps are made out of Teflon, so they're really tough. Even though they're going to be out in the elements year-round for maybe 2 or 3 years, this Teflon doesn't erode and break. So the way we put it on is just right here at their back. Again, that antenna, like Laurel showed you with the other one, it just kind of streamlines right over top of their tail feathers. And then you take these Teflon tape and you wrap it around their legs, around the front and up through the back. And then there are little eyelets right here on the side of the unit. And so you run that tape up through the eyelet on each side and you pull it tight, and then that's how that backpack stays on there. These, if you get them on right and the bird, survives, they could last for a couple of years. And as long as that battery, that solar panel, faces the sun every now and then, it'll constantly charge that. So these are very cool because they are communicating with the satellite 5 times every 24 hours, and they're recording the location of that bird 5 times a day, every day of the year, as long as this unit's still working. The things that would make this not work is if the bird dies or the unit falls off or somehow it gets turned upside down. If that battery doesn't get recharged from the sun, then it's going to shut the unit off. Or if a predator gets a hold of this and chomps through it, that could disable all the mechanics inside. So at that point, then we know we have a mortality on the bird. We try to go find this. These little units are $4,000. They're super expensive, but they're pretty amazing too, because I could be a lazy biologist and I could sit at my desk and just plug into my computer and I could download all the data from this. And like I said, it's 5 locations a day, every day of the year I get from this little unit here. So we get quite a bit of information off of these little units here. So
We have a very cool picture or video of capture that I'd love to share with you guys after all of this conversation. And then we're going to have some questions after that. So give me a second. All right.
Sir, yes, sir.
Good binocular strap for us.
I think it is. It's like Lucky Charm. Alright.
On the color.
No, I was looking for the equipment to take it off. There we go.
Awesome. So that's a little night action capture time. Let me get back over here to where we're seeing. And I want to open it up to questions now. Most of our students are on the live stream for this one. Kathleen, do we have any questions?
Several.
Excellent.
Yeah. One question about being out in the wild at night, capturing birds.
Yes.
More dramatic than they were, but have you come across anything that surprised you? What's surprising you that you're learning about sage-grouse?
all right.
Okay. You want to go first?
Yeah, so being out at night is amazing. It is really awesome. I really enjoy the heck out of it, even though I'm very tired right now. But so, like in the Big Hole Valley where I'm doing my study, last night, for instance, we were shining our headlamp. You know, you're trying to pick up that eye shine from the birds, and all of a sudden, about 4 feet off the ground, you're picking up a bunch of green lights, and there's a big herd of elk right there, and that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then last week we were capturing, and this time of year there's a lot of wet areas, of course, as the snow is melting, and there's a lot of little puddles and ponds that aren't normally there a little bit later in the summer. And so we very successfully captured, unbeknownst to us, a killdeer until we got up to it. And then we also tried to capture mistakenly a frog because it has the same color eyes as sage-grouse that I found out.
Yeah, so
So
sometimes the ice, when it's really cold out and we're out trapping at night, the ice crystals will shine back and look like sage-grouse too. But kind of the other really interesting thing, and maybe the interesting thing about sage-grouse, I guess, learning is when you're out at night capturing, and it's the peak of the breeding season, the males will be out displaying at midnight.
Yeah.
So we'll, be riding by on our ATVs or their spotlights, and all of a sudden you see a bunch of males out there displaying, even though, it's the middle of the night and it's dark. They've got their testosterone going, and they're, ready to breed, and so that was a really cool thing.
yeah,
So.
if there's any moon out, or sometimes just the beam from our flashlight triggers them to thinking it's sunlight and we need to start displaying. So, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then, last year we had a night where we finished up about 3 in the morning, and just before we loaded up our ATVs, we just kind of turned them off and looked up, and the northern lights were out. So
Yeah.
it's pretty remarkable, actually, to have those sort of hours.
Wow.
Not that any of us choose them
Right.
by nature, but
There's some
yeah.
really cool stuff going on at night.
Yeah, yep. So coyotes howling and all sorts of good stuff.
Well, we have several other classes that have just joined. Some of them are wondering about you all and how you got started in this crazy work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take it away, Laurel.
All right. Well, mine's not super exciting, I guess, but I always knew I wanted to work with animals somehow when I was growing up, and I decided I didn't want to be a veterinarian, which is really funny because I didn't want to go through years and years of school, but I did anyway. So I got into wildlife when I was in college. I just worked with a lot of students who were doing it and got to go out and capture butterflies and capture birds, and it was the coolest thing in the world to be able to be outside and get to handle animals and just see what was going on. So I found that really exciting, and so I went that path in college and went to school for it, and I just kept going, and I went to graduate school and got a master's degree and a PhD in wildlife, and people were nice enough to give me a job, and now I get to do it all the time. So that's how I got here.
Yeah. So I had a pretty similar story where, I wanted to work with animals, and the only thing I knew was being a veterinarian. So started down that route, and then took a job in college in the summertime where I worked with 2 different summers. One was working with turtles on somebody's research project, and then another one was working on shorebirds. And I realized there's a whole other world of wildlife out there. And so, and then what really clinched it for me is back in '92, which I know none of you were born then. I was visiting a friend in Yellowstone, and I was there for a little while and had some free time. And so I actually was able to volunteer with the grizzly trappers and trap some grizzlies in Yellowstone and put radio collars on them. And that just clinched it for me. I mean, once I did that, I knew I wanted to be in Montana and working with wildlife. And so same sort of thing as far as getting a master's degree at Montana State University. And then I've been working with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for 14 years. And no 2 days are alike, and it's great fun. So really love my job.
Great. Where do we want to go from here? I'm thinking.
Well, do you have schools that are still participating?
We have a few, but I think we could probably wrap. I think one of the things that you might want to talk about is what you're learning about sage-grouse as it applies to the challenge given the students, which is multiple use and how to share the land a little bit with people.
Sure.
Do you want to start? And I'm going to run to my truck and grab something for that
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, so what we've learned is like the most important thing for sage-grouse is conserving sagebrush. So you know, not necessarily managing it and trying to do specific things with vegetation, but you have to have the land and the sagebrush first. And so we've learned that we have to work with a lot of different partners to make that happen. Working with state and federal agencies, and then private landowners. And private landowners are the most important because there are a lot of ranches and a lot of private land in Montana, and that's the best way to conserve a lot of land, is working with those different partners to make that happen. And that there are a lot of land uses that are compatible with sage-grouse. Grazing, a lot of things that people assumed were bad, but actually could be pretty good. If grazing is done, right and sustainable with the land, which is, it's definitely a realistic thing to do. Grouse and grazing coexist really well. You can have multiple land uses as long as you do it smartly, and so that's one of the biggest takeaways, I think.
So with the Big Hole project, this started last year was our first year capturing, and last night finished up our second year capturing. And but the whole project started because the different agencies that work in the Big Hole, the foresters, the BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Department of Natural Resources, all the agencies that own property in the Big Hole, the Big Hole Watershed Committee, several ranchers, the Nature Conservancy, Vigilante Co-op that has power lines going across the Big Hole Valley. Everybody was interested in coming together and learning more about the sage-grouse population in the Big Hole. And in particular, we just asked very basic questions. How are the sage-grouse using the Big Hole Valley throughout the year, especially at specific times of year when it's pretty critical for them, breeding, nesting, brood rearing, and wintering? Are they leaving the Big Hole Valley? If so, where are they going? Are they mixing with other sage-grouse populations in southwest Montana and even in Idaho? And and everybody had an interest in that because we all have a vested interest overall in trying to make sure to conserve a healthy sage-grouse population in the Big Hole Valley and beyond. And then the information that we're gathering from the sage-grouse, from those little GPS units I showed you, will help us as the agency folks work with landowners and work on our own properties that we're managing, the Forest Service and the BLM, to best manage the property and have best management practices on private lands that are compatible with sage-grouse but still allow ranching and other uses of the land. So I printed off some of these maps. I hope you'll be able to see them, but
You can bring them right up to the camera.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these dots represent the locations of a specific hen, and this was last spring. This was a hen that we captured last year, and so this was kind of April, May into June from the time we captured her. And what I like about this hen is you could see houses right here. So there's there's one little subdivision in the Big Hole Valley, but this hen liked to put her nest right outside this little subdivision. So one of the things that this tells us is, we're going to go visit with these landowners and just let them know, like, hey, this is really good sage-grouse nesting habitat. We know you like to, have a yard and get rid of some of the sagebrush around there, but maybe don't get rid of as much sagebrush as you originally thought you would. And in fact, one of these landowners, about 4 years ago, sent me a picture. He said, I was out mowing down my sagebrush, and I found this. I cut down this bush, and there was a hen on a nest underneath it. So he just kind of put the bush back up. But so that's the information that we're getting that we will directly use to sit down with landowners at their kitchen tables with coffee cups and talk about this stuff. And, you know, might sometimes just a little bit of knowledge and people can make some changes. The other thing I wanted to show you about these locations, so these are all the different locations of where that bird was over the course of the nesting period. I don't know if you could see this one dot right there, how it's much bigger and darker than the other dots. When I zoom in on that dot, it's actually a whole bunch of days and times, and that's how we find the nest location, because that's where she's sitting tight. All these represent dates and times from that one location. And so that tells me she's on that nest, she's incubating, and so we figure about 28 days for incubation. We figure out the start of when she's sitting tight on that nest, because during incubation they don't really leave their nest that much. And then we calculate out 28 days, and then we go out and we see, we go check the nest and see if she successfully hatched her eggs or not. This one did, and so then the next thing is her brood rearing. So once she hatched her nest, and there were 8 eggs in that one, and it looked like they all hatched well. So her nest was up here to the north. Then she moves her brood down to this country here, and this is all on private land. The lighter ground is dry, and then the darker ground is wet areas, what we call mesic meadows. There's a lot of moisture there. There's also a lot of insects and forbs and things that the chicks need to eat that time of year to put on a lot of weight, a lot of protein. That's where they get their protein. And so you can see how important these wet areas are. This is that hen moving around with her brood over the course of the summer. And so this is good information too. Again, we sit down with the landowner and we say, hey, during this time of year, this is really important. So we might be able to alter some of the grazing schedule of when they're putting cattle in the pasture, and maybe just get them to wait a little bit until the brooding period is over. And so that's the direct application for the information that we're gathering. This is the overwinter location for that same hen. So it's the same general area, but she kind of moved out of those wet areas. Of course, in the wintertime, they want more sagebrush cover. They don't need wet. They're trying to stay warm. And so you can't really tell from this being zoomed out too much, but this is all really good sagebrush cover. And in the winter, they're primarily eating sagebrush leaves. And so they need areas where the sagebrush is staying above the snow. And so all this information that we're gathering, it's gee whiz stuff, but we then are taking these maps, we're sitting down with landowners or with the Forest Service or the BLM, whoever's land that sage-grouse is on, and just seeing if we could do things a little bit better for sage-grouse conservation. So, yeah.
That is so great. Do we have any questions, Kathleen?
Just a wonder that has nothing to do with sage-grouse, but Bannack, you mentioned you captured grizzly bears.
Yes.
They want to know how you did that.
Very carefully.
No,
Not with the
I would
spotlight and
guess.
rubber net.
Yeah, not with this little net, I could tell you that. It was an amazing experience. So I helped with 3 different captures, and each one was different. The first one was a snare. So we had there's a really stinky moose carcass, and we set up a snare as a foothold. And so ideally you attach that snare to the tree and place it relative to that carcass in such a way that you're going to capture the front foot. And so then the bear it only has this much space between the tree and where it's held tight. We kind of missed on the measurement. So we ended up capturing that bear by 3 toes on its hind foot, which was pretty dangerous, but it worked out okay. So that one was a snare. The next one was very cut and dry. It was what we call a culvert trap. So they're like these big steel drums that have a trap door, and you put bait on a trigger at the back of the culvert, and so the bear goes in there attracted to the bait, which is really just an odor bait. It's not, they don't get a food reward. And when they pull on the bag that smells like rotten meat, it triggers the door to come down. So that one was pretty sane and comfortable. And then the last one was pretty adventurous too. It was in Hayden Valley, which we had to ride horses in about 5 or 6 miles. And that also was one of those culvert traps. So there was a big, the big culvert trap set back there, but it was about 6 miles back in. And when we went to set the trap, we had to ride through herds of buffalo in the fall during the rut, which is a little dangerous and crazy in itself. But then when we actually got a bear, this was in October, and so it was a pretty cold, snowy day. And we immobilized the bear with a dart and drugs, and that because of the time of year and the temperature, that bear was starting to go into hibernation instead of coming out of the drug. And you don't want to leave a mobilized animal because they're defenseless. And so we were staying with that bear until it started to come back around. Well, in the meantime, 3 other grizzlies came in. So it was pretty crazy. So, yeah.
So if you decide to do this for a living, kids,
Right.
know
Yeah.
that it's kind of crazy.
It's kind of crazy. Yeah, you gotta be a little crazy.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll be back at 12:30 Mountain Standard Time for our next event, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.